Patah, you know that. It just doesn't work. Patah says, I haven't finished my explanation yet. I didn't speak of the fact that you should do this. It should be a voluntary rendering of all those human beings who respect your work and find it worthy of its wages. Billy says, you make me laugh. You speak a very swollen language of open begging. But I am not a beggar, Patah. Patah says, your speech is illogical because voluntary rendering always occurs in sincerity for something good. Billy says, still, there's a form of begging, except that it's just indirect. But I will not beg, damn it. And in the fulfillment of my task, I don't work to get rich. Patah says, you and your family have to be able to live, yet you don't beg indirectly and you don't even let yourself be paid for your work. Billy says, it is, nevertheless, like that. Patah says, you speak illogically. Semyaza says, I see no hope, Father. For this reason, I've already told him that he should let certain matters be administered by a friend, such as the sale of writings or books transmitted to him. But he said that he would become a baby through this. It is, however, my wish that he entrusts these matters to a friend, for otherwise, he places the writings and books in sales and marketing, without even receiving any thanks or wages for all his work. Patah says, that wouldn't be right. Your idea is very good. Billy says, I can still do what I want. Patah says, you may not do that because that which is voluntarily given to you is given in sincerity and serves for you and your family to live. Hence, don't use gifts given to you for others' assistance again. Others need assistance less than you. You will often only be exploited. Billy says, I just have to be ready for that. Patah says, but you and your family live and want because of that. Now listen to what I have to tell you. The wish of my daughter is justified and good. Therefore, entrust a friend with the administration of those matters that secure your existence for you. You have to perform the most difficult task. Therefore, you should pass on writings and books, etc. with appropriate remuneration. This isn't a form of greed or any other materialism, and when you receive gifts, this doesn't mean the acceptance of a beggar's good. It is only the right that is entitled to you in your world, as well as every other life form of your world, each of which performs a job in order to be remunerated and fed for it. Consider the old prophets, who were long before your time. They weren't as anti-materialistically pronounced as you, but they were also dependent on renderings for their work, which they had to accept, in order to be able to live and exist. Think also of the birds of the sky. They, too, work and are remunerated for it. Their instinct directs them to hunt for vermin, which they catch and destroy, in order to protect plant life and other life forms from these. But they are recompensed for this with the fact that they, through the extermination of the vermin, are provided with everything that satisfies their hunger, that gives them strength, and that lets their plumage appear in magnificent splendor. Billy says, one could think that you're an ornithologist or a romantic. Patah says, neither is true, but with your comment, you just want to put a different twist on the topic. It is very unpopular to you. After everything that I now know, I hold your anti-materialism in honor, and I consider myself lucky to know him who is anchored in you. But you must be helped, so it is, therefore, also my wish that a good friend of yours with good knowledge takes care of the mentioned concerns. Billy says, that really won't work, Patah. It just won't work. Patah says, you make me seriously agitated. Now listen very carefully to my question. Do you want to endanger our annual very important mission or even question it? Billy says, certainly not, Patah. Patah says, do you still have the necessary means to live? Billy says, well, it still goes. Patah says, you avoided my question. Do you still have the necessary means to live? Your answer should be yes or no. Billy says, I said, nevertheless. Patah says, your answer. Billy says, no. Well, all right, I'm bankrupt and can't even pay my bills from the month of December. Patah says, and the celebration, where you celebrate Emmanuel's honor? Billy says you know, nevertheless, that this is only a pseudo-celebration. Pata says you didn't answer my question. Billy says well then, we make a small Christmas tree for the children. Pata says and further? Billy says what further? Somehow, I will soon scrape together something, so that I can also buy them a gift. Pata says that's how the situation is. Your family's living in want may not be, and it will no longer occur in this form in about a year from now. I myself will be concerned about that. Henceforth, I will control your steps relating to this. Because of this, I now have to suggest the following to you. You said earlier that you want to fulfill your mission. That is very good. You can only fulfill it, however, if you accept assistance that has been offered to you. I impose on you, as an obligation, that you place the mentioned concerns into the care of a trustworthy friend. Thus, he regulates the necessary matters for you and you have the essentials to support you and your family. I also impose on you, as an obligation, to accept gifts given to you in love and sincerity as your property. Should you not satisfy this obligation, then I would have to suspend all transmissions to you and all contacts for the duration of the time that you need to reflect. Finally, I would still like to say that from now on, you should accept the free thanks donations of those human beings whom you help and advise, and should use these for living costs, etc. for you and your family. These include those donations of those human beings whom you release from physical and psychological suffering. Billy says you are quite radical. Pata says you force me to it, for I cannot and may not allow it that you and your family live and want in your now materialistic world and that you are destroyed. Billy says do you really mean that seriously? Pata says my words correspond to my sense. Billy says then I'll simply correspond to your wish and ask someone if he wants to mess with the things mentioned. You do, indeed, force me to it. But believe me, I still won't discard my anti-materialism, not even if you spit fire and brimstone. Pata says the speech also wasn't about that. You should remain as you are. It's just that a good friend should administer your concerns mentioned. Billy says good, then I just stay on track. You can't forbid me, however, that I only pass this contact report on to all friends and acquaintance once these pesky holidays are over. Pata says Semyaza will already transmit it to you before that time. Billy says but I will quite simply have no time to print it. And I can only pass it on once I've printed it. Pata says so you want to postpone this work for certain reasons. Billy says exactly. Pata says I can't keep you from that, which I also don't want to do, because I understand you and your concerns very well. Billy says now a stone falls from my mill. Pata says I exercise no compulsion on you in this matter, but where it is necessary for the purpose of your and your family's well-being, I will intervene. Billy says topic ended. Pata says that should suffice. Billy says okay, then I have another question regarding Mount Shasta. I've already talked about this with Semyaza, but something still seems unclear to me. Semyaza told me that distant descendants of the Hyperboreans now live in Mount Shasta, on the Aleutian Islands, and in Alaska. Enoch, however, and also Emmanuel, spoke of the winds between the east and west or between the north and west. From this, I always thought that the green land of the Hyperboreans, so Hyperborea, must have been somewhere far up north, in Greenland or something. But now, this doesn't make sense anymore with Mount Shasta. What should I now think of this? Pata says at the time of Enoch, the North Pole was situated differently than what is the case today. Through cosmic influences and through an upset of the Earth, the North Pole at that time shifted far to the west. The central point of the North Pole at that time is identical to present-day Florida in America. The polar regions at the time of Enoch were wondrous landscapes, filled with palms and other tropical vegetation. You would say that it was paradise on earth, for it had the most favorable climate of your world. Golden apples flourished and ripened there. These are simply called oranges today. In the timelessly young nature of Hyperborea, an uninterrupted summer prevailed, and it was also called the land of timeless youth. The most delicious fruits thrived there, like nowhere else on earth. The average annual temperature in the land of Hyperborea was 26.7 degrees of your measuring values, and the coldest season never sank below the value of 21.9 degrees of your current values. Similar conditions can still be found today in the former Hyperborea, so in Florida. Billy says that is fantastic. But can you tell me exactly where at the North Pole this Hyperborea lay? Ptah says it lay exactly where the land is still called Greenland today, whereby the actual North Pole of that time isn't identical with today's North Pole. Billy says so. Greenland, as far as I know, this means grassland in the German language. Ptah says that is so. Turnanog lay there. Billy says what's that? Ptah says Greenland and land of youth. But at that time, it was today's Florida. Billy says so then Heracles, Gilgamesh, Enoch, Emmanuel, Amitabha, Methuselah and Noah and all others were up there and not in Florida. Ptah says in Hyperborea, in Florida, when it was still at the spot where today, the land still means grassland. But Emmanuel wasn't there because he was already in Florida, where it is to be found today. Billy says of course, he didn't live until much later. But in connection with the Hyperboreans, I still come to another question, namely about the legendary Agharta. Are you also oriented about this and can you give me more details about it? Ptah says you surprise me again and again. How is the right name familiar to you? To my knowledge, the humanity of Earth still lives in error regarding the name of Agharta. In general, it is still erroneously called Agharta. Billy says you forget that I was in India and in the Himalayas for a long time and also encountered the blue human beings. Ptah says that's why. I should know that. Unfortunately, I can't give you exhaustive information in an open form because certain things still have to remain confidential. However, this much may be said, that in the vicinity of Shigatse and Shampula is the underground realm of Agharta, the capital and center of distant descendants of extraterrestrials on Earth. This is the center of the actual secrets that hold a gigantic power in themselves. This city is controlled by the race of the Sons of the Sun. But unfortunately, a tendency toward earthly world domination also prevails with this race, just like with certain earthly religions and secret societies. I may not explain anything else about it openly. Just as Ptah speaks his last words, an android approaches and says something in a language that is incomprehensible to me. Ptah says the missing beam ship has already been found, so we can now continue the journey. Our next goal shall be the moon of the third world. With Semyaza, you can visit it and also photograph it if you want to do that. After that, move on to that world, which she wants to let you see. With Ptah's great spacer, we glide out into space, while Semyaza and I let ourselves fall into the transportation chute and, in the hangar, go to her ship. Soon, we glide out of the AI lock into free space and rush on to the moon of the third world. A conversation doesn't come about for the time being, and so, I devote myself entirely to the events on the moon, where the human beings of the future have already built their stations and live there. Semyaza only gives me reference notes on various activities and buildings on the moon, which I then write down as references, in order to have later descriptions for the pictures made by me. The flight in all directions over the moon lasts for several hours, and then Semyaza brings her ship back into free space, where I make 2 specific observations. Billy says Semyaza, where's Ptah? I can't see his spacer. Semyaza says it's in the protection of his radiation screens. Billy says you mean protected from view? Semyaza says surely, because we are strangers here, that's why I also had to put the protective screen into effect around my beam ship. The human beings of this